Okay. So thank you to everyone who has signed up. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. It's just got the right to know on it. Can I get a yes from Araceli?
Yes.
Excellent. So Right to Know is a tool that we created, which is a new, as it says on the screen, new digital community health tool providing postcode analysis of environmental pollutants. Who created this? So we are Centric Lab. We are a independent neuroscience lab creating tools and strategies for community health.
Hey Josh, I think I can't see it, and I think other people can't. I didn't know if it was just delayed, but yeah, I can't. The screen went away like maybe a minute or two ago. Oh, there we go. Perfect. Sorry to cut you in there, but
that's all right. How about now? Can you see the screen now?
Yep.
Okay. So we are Centric Lab. We're an independent organization made up of a team of predominantly neuroscientists and researchers. And our job is to understand how cities and urbanization has a role on our biology. And we create tools to analyze this. We create tools to engage with people on it. Right to Know is a special project which we worked with Guppy Bola, who is on the call with us, to help launch this and strategize in how we make this such a great project. Ben Byford was our web programmer who helped us organize everything into a usable web app. And everything was made possible by the great support of CGG, who are a global geo-environmental science company. And we worked with them as they had got in touch with us about a version of this we had created for London. And they said, can we make this for the entirety of the UK? And so over the past sort of 8-9 months, we have been working with some of their data scientists and analysing environmental data sets from across the UK from different sources, whether they be international satellite data, whether they be sources, multiple air pollution sources from people like DEFRA, as well as other Office of National Statistics data, in order to create the Right to Know tool. What we're going to do is we're going to have a little watch of the video, which explains everything about Right to Know, why it was created and why we think it's important. We have a couple of examples of what happens when you enter in a postcode that will explain some of the differences. And then we're very much going to open up to an open Q&A and feedback session, because we created this not to say how great we are, but how to put the platform and questions out there to get people to ask questions about where it can be used, how it can be used, why it can be used, etc., etc. So it's there for yourselves, not for us. So hopefully when I click a button here, we're going to be able to hear my voice narrating a video.
Right to Know, a community's health project. Introducing a new digital tool providing a postcode analysis of environmental pollutants and deprivation data. And we're doing this because health is more than our individual behaviours or a genetic lottery. When we blame individuals for bad health, we increase health inequity, as it ignores the systemic factors that contribute to poor health, such as air pollution linked to dementia, respiratory diseases and diabetes, or noise pollution linked to poor sleep, cardiovascular diseases and anxiety, or light pollution linked to obesity, fatigue and depression, and heat pollution linked to cardiovascular diseases, respiratory complications and heat stroke, as well as psychological stress from experiencing poverty, discrimination or violence, also contribute to chronic disease. It's time to reframe.
Okay, I will. Don't worry. 45. I'll just cut it down.
Environments influence our biological health.
Oh, you want me?
Our bodies
What do you want?
are in constant communication with our surroundings through
Okay, I
various
will.
biological
Okay.
systems.
Yeah.
One of these
Yeah.
key systems is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which regulates through various hormonal responses. It allows our bodies to detect and adapt to acute stresses, such as those found in the places we live. When we're constantly exposed to stresses such as pollutants, our bodies struggle to adapt, causing a constant engagement of the HPA axis, which can lead to a dysregulation of our biological systems. This dysregulation is the link between place and health. You have the right to know about the systemic stressors in your area that could be a risk to your health. So type in your postcode to access your area breakdown. Knowledge leads to change, helping us all heal faster. Join us at righttoknow.org, a project by
So thank you for those who watched it, and hopefully that you have seen this video before. Araceli, I'm going to pass over to you now to explain a little bit more about what happens when one does a search.
Okay, great. Thanks for that, Josh. I will just remind everyone kindly, please mute your computers. Okay, so when you type in your postcode, you get something like this. We wanted to look at two things to illustrate how the data works. So this is N14ST, which is in Dalston, in Islington, considered a good area. If you look at the air pollution, the urban heat island or heat, the night radiance or light pollution and noise pollution, they're all incredibly high. From here, we have to understand that when we're saying that it is high versus we're saying when it's low, is that that's a question of how your body is reacting to the stressor. But we're talking about risk. We're not talking about safety. And this is what's really important and why we're having the demo, is that we're not saying that low risk means no risk. Low risk is still very much a threat to your health, especially for young children or the elderly or people who are already suffering from a chronic illness. We are now dealing with long haul COVID. So if you have something like long haul COVID, even something that shows up as low risk can still pose a risk to your health. So it's the first thing that we wanted to make sure that we were articulating. And if you give us the next slide, Josh, please. This is going to be in a reading of rural Wales. If you see, the air pollution is medium and the heat is medium, and then we have low on light and noise. What to take away from this is that, again, air pollution is very much a threat, even in the countryside. So the idea that that air pollution is only a hazard or a threat in city centers, that's no longer true. Wherever there are cars or industry, which sometimes specifically big industry is taken off cities and into the countryside, these again can present very much a risk to your health because of high levels of air pollution. And then in terms of the heat, again, we are not suffering huge amounts of urban heat island effect the way that you would in London. But again, it shows us that, again, that the climate is changing. And so for people that have cardiovascular diseases, a heat wave can present a high risk to their health. So the takeaway from here is a couple of things. Number one is that there are sadly no places within the UK that we found that really have low levels or healthy levels of air pollution, because technically the healthy levels of air pollution are zero. That's what we need to aim for. We need to bring all of these environmental stressors down. The second takeaway is that even though we're saying low risk, it really doesn't mean zero risk. Therefore, in those areas that say low, it doesn't mean that it's okay. It just means that they're not as high as some of the high levels that we see. For example, those living in areas like Southall, where they're very close to Heathrow, their air pollution is insubordinate, really, really high. It just means that you're not there, but it doesn't mean that you have clean air. And that's what we really wanted to highlight with this tool, is for all of us to start becoming aware that environmental pollutants affect our health. B, that we deserve so much better than to constantly breathe in dirty air or being subjected to heat waves, or not even being able to get a restful night's sleep because of light pollution. Okay, so we're going to stop there. I'm going to pass it over to Guppy, and then we're going to open up to Q&A.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. So I simply wanted to talk a little bit about the tool and the organizing efforts. You know, the probably loads of different tools and bits of data that you can find online, but part of the reason that I was really excited about this project was because the initiator was the relationships with community organizers that help design and think about what would actually be useful to support further organization and community resistance around environmental pollutants. And so we've been working together to build this tool for the last 8 months, but it isn't just, you know, the team that were involved, but also the inspiration from other organizers. Part of the work in the next phase of this project is to help, I guess, gather momentum around using it, but then find ways to collectively connect those who are in similar areas and who are also thinking about the different pollutants in their area. And part of the way that you can support us in doing that is, being inspired by the different communities. I've written about some of them in the article that Araceli shared earlier, who have been starting to organize around environmental improvements. Support and help organize a town hall for your community. And you can do that by sending email to the email address I'm about to drop in the chat box. So town halls, we can help organize with you, and it basically is a chance for the community to come together and share insights from their own experiences around environmental pollutants in their areas. And if you're already an organized community group and you want to help, you want some help or support in strategizing around the issues that you're dealing with, then that email is the one you want to, and we'll be in touch to help. And so, yeah, we hope that we can basically take this tool offline and begin using it for a bit of community organization. And just keen to hear from anyone who is interested in doing that work.
Cool, thank you, Guppy. So yeah, so regardless if you are just starting off or have a community that is already dealing with this, which there are loads across the UK, we want to open up the lab and say that we are here for some feedback and also to collaborate. So yeah, so let's open it up now for some questions. Does anybody have questions around the data, around how we scored, around the health issues that or health pathways? I see a hand already. Roland, want to go?
Hi, thank you. I'm sorry, I can't get my video to work, so you can't see me, but some of you know what I look like anyway. I think it's fantastic. It's really important work. I just had a question about the sort of scale of the information. The examples you presented were at local authority scale. Certainly in some areas, this information is available at kind of ward level. Is that going to be accessible through the platform, or is there a plan to drill down into those levels of detail?
Can I take this one, Jenny?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so you are correct, Roland. We at Centric Lab have been able to dissect these down to ward level. For the purposes of right to know, it's a personal tool. So that's why it is postcode related, is about your local environment. So we worked with CGG to be able to drill down these very large scale data sets to a scale that we felt was true to the data. So we haven't gone, to the 20 by 20 meter zone that you can get in some elements, because that data isn't possible and we would have been incorrect and untruthful to the data. So in this case, the postcode data does give you a large area sort of zone around you. And we compare it to the local authority average just to give a comparison of where a person's immediate environment compares amongst the general area of their local authority. However, we have been working with CGG and Centric Lab will be working or intend to work with city authorities and large organizations to look at the more national-based data sets and start to look at the comparisons, analyses, correlations, etc., etc. So yeah, that data is available for the right types of projects. We will be launching one in line with COP26 coming up in a couple of weeks, where people can look a little bit more intently at at that sort of more data viz element of the whole of Great Britain.
Great, thanks.
Okay, cool. Thanks for that, Roland. Anyone else? If you just press the little hand button, or just wave your hand, or just start talking.
Well, it looks like Paul has this one in the chat regarding about the variation in local authority for deprivation and noise and on similar areas. And I guess a suggestion.
Where do you see that? Well, take it, Dan, because I don't know where you're.
It's in the chat.
Oh, right. Sorry. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, but yeah, this is. I mean, the thing is about this is that when it comes to the scale on the delineation, and this is something that there are people, because I see Diana's on the call as well, but from CGG side, they'll we talked a lot about, I guess, about like how you account for the fact that the differences between lines and how similar areas and everything. And the true answer is that it's kind of like what Josh is kind of repeating what Josh said before, that the way the postcodes are set up and the way that the original data are set up they're not collected in the same manner and at the same scale. So the actual deprivation date, like not the deprivation, the pollutants are not connected at local authority scale, that they're connected at grids, because that's just the normal nature of that type of data. So there will be situations in which maybe something is kind of on the border and it kind of edges more to one side or another. Maybe it's not the case of where the box specifically lands, where you'd think from culturally, or you think geographically that it should be tied to the left, but it ends up being tied to the right. But the whole idea, obviously, is the fact that this is giving general, it's like an education and a visualization tool. So it's more to kind of give, it's more to just kind of give an idea of what the potential is and what the risk is. And that's why, even from a narrative standpoint, we put it as low, medium, and high. We didn't put them as every specific number has a specific, call to action or a specific kind of copy about it. I mean, I guess, and then in terms of the Nexus side, public health tools integration, that's something that we right now it's just to get these things together, get the stressors and the deprivation. But when it comes to public health, this is something I'm kind of writing on already, for another centric paper. But it's every time you bring a new stakeholder, a new entity into it, they'll have their own processes, their own scales, their own practices, their own level that they can get down to, that you kind of have to do some playing around to figure out what's the most applicable scale and format to put the data in, so that you're not lying about one, or you're not fixing one into the box of another just to tell a story. But it's stuff that we're looking into, and now that we've got a partnership like CGG, like it gives us more options in terms of how we can play around with that. So I hope that kind of helped answer that question.
Yeah, thanks for that, Dan. So what we really need to be specific, and possibly we might need to articulate it better. This is an awareness tool, specifically to allow people to begin to understand that health is an ecological phenomena, that we're not getting sick because we haven't hit the gym in the last 3 weeks, or because we're not eating 5 fruits and vegetables per day. We are getting sick at a systemic level, i.e. in our body, because of the environmental pollutants that are in our area. 1. 2, this tool is, as Josh said, for people to be able to understand what is going on in their area. This isn't a commercial tool or even a scientific tool to be able to study trends. For that, we have the software system on biological inequity that we can be able to look at health trends that are correlated to the environmental pollutants. And then thirdly, in terms of health, we do want to make sure that we are also articulating, and like I said, we're wanting this feedback to make sure that we're also as articulate as we possibly can, is that we need the lived experience. So for professionals, so for a GP to make a decision about an area, or for a planner to make a decision about the area, we still need the lived experience data. Because, for example, in an area that has low levels quote unquote low levels of air pollution, right? So not low levels of air pollution, lower risk of air pollution. You might have a community that is predominantly having the effects of COVID, right? That they got very hard hit by COVID. And that also means the cascade effects of that they're probably having some economic and financial challenges, which then in the next couple of years will set them off to other health vulnerabilities. We would have to go in there and then investigate that to then see what are the actual health risks to that community. If we're taking it at the industry level, right? If we're talking to a GP or we're talking to an urban planner and creating strategies. But the right to know is just what it says on the tin. You have the right to know what's going on in your area and to understand that you're not getting sick because you're doing something wrong.
So I'm just going to jump in. I've seen on my screen that Joanna has a question. So Joanna, do you want to unmute yourself and ask a question?
Yes, thanks, Josh. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, my connection is terrible today, so I'm not going to turn my camera on. Thanks for the presentation. And I just want to say this tool is great. I've shared it with my colleagues across Natural Resources Wales, and we're always trying to come up with ways to share the data that we're responsible for collecting. And I think this is a much more successful tool than many of the ones that we've come up with. But I'm also interested in how we can make sure that people use this hand in hand with other data that's available. So for example, in Wales, we've done a lot of work to map out where there's opportunities for nature-based solutions to tackle some of these issues. So where we think we need to have more green space to tackle air pollution and so on. So I'm really keen to make sure that where there are conversations happening with communities, that we're also able to say, yeah, things are really bad, but this is some of the ways that we're going to try and tackle it. My question is really just around like how I think some people will see the readout of their local area and it just might not represent what they think is happening. And one of the reasons that that might be is because it doesn't take into account things like just other important environmental variables, like if you live by the coast, it tends to be windier, and so it feels fresher. So I wonder how, in the community organizing with this tool, you're going to tackle those kind of conversations about the fact that it's not necessarily going to chime with what people think.
Yeah, that's a really, really good question, Joanna. So again, this is to get that conversation started, right? So if and when a community gets in touch with us, that's why we're making our lab open and available for them to go, do you know what, guys, this is what it's looking on the ground, because it's so important for everyone to understand that works with data, that data is not real life. Data is just a way of numerically reading some of the phenomena and events that are happening in the environment, but it's not the lived experience. So that's where, again, we would go in with the community to go, okay, and say, what is happening at ground level? And I learned this term from CGG, ground truthing, right? Ground truthing the data. So then we can have both. So when we're working with that community, we would have that initial score, right to know, but we would also bring in the local expertise, the local lived experience, and those other phenomena that you described that are happening. So then we have a fuller picture that then from there, they could report back to an organization like you, Joanna, and go, okay, this is now what's really happening. We have a real capture of what's happening at that local level. But again, it's always right to know plus, right to know, like any other data that is available is not the total picture. Richard?
So I just wanted to quickly add also that what happens over time is because of, as Araceli said, there's that lived experience, macro data kind of dissonance. Over time, we hope to build case studies and kind of be able to actually reflect that difference, so be able to say that to get to a point where maybe a year down the line, if a similar type of community has already gone through this and they look at similar on a macro level and they're already talking about similar or slightly different things on a lived experience, that people have a case study to understand, rather than just, oh, I should follow these people because they look like us on a macro level, is that I should follow the example because kind of the full gambit of like how they even treat things culturally, and maybe they're a similar area, but they're also a higher migrant population or a higher elderly population, or etc., that people can begin to have those sort of resources available to them. So every time a new experience and a new solution has happened with a community, it just builds up that arsenal of something that's past the level of just macro data for you and into something where you can actually see these true lived experiences. So I just wanted to add that, because that's kind of where we want the future of this kind of work to go.
So two things. Dan, can you answer Matthew, because he had a written question? And then I'll go to Richard, who has a hand up. Anybody who would like to leave, obviously you're free to go, because it's only a half-an-hour slot, but we will be here for another 30 minutes if necessary to keep answering the questions. We're also going to do an FAQ bit to the site, taking these questions into consideration to make sure that we're continuing our articulation for you guys. So yeah, Richard, go. Sorry, Richard, I think you might need to unmute.
No, I think you might need to check your microphone input.
Or should we read out the question in the meantime and look to answer it? So
Matthew asks, I'm horrified to see pollution levels associated with my old UK address. Yes, likewise, I was the one living in Islington, and I was like, oh my gosh, I live in such a great area. No. Are you using APIs? Oh, the thing just moved. Sorry, now I have to find it again. Are you using APIs as a data input for this tool? Is it scalable to other countries? Matthew in Spain, working for NGO Civicus. So maybe I actually pass the ball to Nick from CGG. The answer is yes, that we do have the capability, as long as CGG wants to continue working with us. But do you want to say anything about that, Nick?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we're very proud to have supported you on this project, Araceli, and we plan to continue to support as well, of course. There would definitely be an opportunity to expand the tool to other countries. I think it really depends on where the Centric Lab want to take this strategically and make sure that we're actually providing data for the right reasons and empowering people for the right reasons. There are obviously differences in what data type and what data resolution are available in different countries. It certainly brings a challenge, but it's a challenge I'm sure we could overcome.
Great.
Just on the literal side, no, we're not pulling APIs from any live data feeds. This is a static annual trend that pulling from. The aim, hopefully in the future, and as if we can develop this further with CGG and perhaps other partners, that this is really starting to enter the question of when does a smart city become a healthy city? When do authorities start to recognize data feeds of environmental stressors and start to plan cities around the issues that are causing us ill health, rather than try to dictate what health should be through a sociological lens, that we have tools like this that maybe are using more live data, more regular data that's looking at seasonality, et cetera, et cetera. These tools exist in isolation, small collecting sensors in different cities around the world, but the whole point is, how can we start to actually, yes, make the smart city a healthy city through tools like this? So this is the beginning, we think, of that journey. And I hope that kind of answers that question on what type of data feeds are we using.
Yeah.
Okay, Richard, do you want to give it another?
Am I audible now?
Yes, you are audible. Thank you, Richard.
Great. Yeah, no, it's I chair the Oxford University Commission on creating healthy cities. And there are a couple of things that we're doing that really get very close to the excellent stuff that you're doing. We're creating indices for the UK cities that pick up on all of the data that's out. There's so much data out there. I mean, the only hazard we've found, you can do the endless correlations, and we've been using Nottingham and then Bristol as our pilots, and they've been very cooperative. But there's fantastic data available. I think we've got about 40 variables to do with health and to do with place. We're very much about that interconnection between those two. and we're doing the correlations between them. Our problem is, unlike you, you've done every postcode in the country. We've broken those cities into their neighborhoods. This is the medium super output areas, you know, that statisticians use, mostly ONS, which is, it means that Nottingham is divided, for example, into 38 neighborhoods. So for each neighborhood, we can do wealth, that's house prices, incomes, that's poverty measures, and then all the health indicators and the environmental pollutants, road air quality, and so on. So we can map these out, but each time we do this, it costs about $4,000 because it's quite a bit of work. And we've got some lovely data scientists who will do this, but we've done a couple, and they said, look, you're asking us to do the whole country. This is gonna, you know, there are at least 100 decent sized cities or big towns. That's at 4,000, that's 400,000. You know, you'll have to stop doing this. So plan B is, instead of giving each city, here's your data bank and here's how you can interactively play with it. But instead of giving them that, we're saying, here's how you build your own model. Here's the architecture, the structure. Here are the sources. Here's the methodology. We've stolen the methodology from Lambeth and Southwark, the two London boroughs, because they've got a very good urban health index that it took them about 3 years to get this together, and we've lifted their methodology and stolen their ideas. But is yours is free, at least it was to find my postcode. Are you going to run up against our problem that everybody wants more from you, but it's going to be $4,000 per city, and this can't go on?
Yeah, so again, to clarify, this is for communities and individuals to raise awareness about health and place, that relationship, for those who want to create environmental justice campaigns. And it's also for those who are already starting to create those environmental justice campaigns to go see, we have some printable data to start with, to say that we, you know, to validate, because a lot of communities are gaslit and told, no, actually, again, the reason you're obese is because you have poor taste in food, which is something that I recently heard yesterday, that they want to stop obesity in children through building better taste habits. And I'm like, that's not how you solve obesity. Obesity is such a complex problem that starts with the environmental stressors in an area. So this will stay free for communities and individuals. In terms of the commercial, this is for cities. So organizations like C40 Cities, and at that level, for them to be able to pay to get the analysis that they need to start strategizing. And yeah, for that, they will pay whatever needs to be paid. But this, for now, not for now, it will stay always as a free tool for communities and for individuals. So then Julia Obida, I don't know if you're still here. I did answer your question.
Yes, I'm still here.
And, yeah, is that okay? Do you want to expand on your question?
No, it's more to understand if individuals and communities could upload their data themselves somehow.
Yes,
exactly.
Sorry.
So it's more to create a collaborative tool somehow, not only to start conversation, but yeah.
Really dope question. Really dope question. Yeah, we've been asked this before. God, we would love that. We would really love that. Yeah, we need funding for that. Because that would be really dope for the communities to start gathering their data, and then we run that in parallel to what's happening. Okay. The closest at the moment that we're going to start sinking our teeth into this is with a clean air app, where we're going to ask communities to log their symptom data. Okay. And from there, we will create cluster maps of where the symptoms are happening in regards to then to their location, and then to see if these symptom clusters are coming together in areas that obviously have extraordinary levels of air pollution, or environmental stressors, or maybe they don't, and there's something else that we're not understanding. Yes. But yeah, we would love to do that. That's probably a couple of years away when we're able to have the funding to create the infrastructure, because we need to be able to store the data. We need to be able to have more scientists to obviously interpret the data, and also collaborate and communicate with the communities.
I mean, just on that, just to play a card, like how much more data do we need, or is the data actually, as you're saying, actually the symptom tracking, the experiential side of data? Do we necessarily need to know the difference between 24 micrograms per cubic meter of particulate matter and 26? Either way, it's still high. You only want to know if it goes from 25 down to 5. And even then, there's still a low risk. And so, something that we experience in this project is, yes, the data is great, but the data just starts a story. And it gives us an understanding to then speak and listen with people who are experiencing the side of, the impacts of this. So I think that there's a double-edged sword to, we created a database tool, but that's to support people in their journeys rather than lead the conversation. So I think that's an important distinction we certainly want to make, and I think is important about these kind of projects is, do we necessarily need more and more data, or do we actually need to be thinking differently about the problems that we're trying to solve, and not hiding behind data, because the data is infinite. You can just keep counting and collecting the data. What's more important is understanding how to engage with people and how to actually understand what people are saying. And I mean this from the institutional side, not into community, from an institutional authority, a company, to recognize when people say this is bad, to not hide behind a value saying, well, it's actually quite low. If it's bad, and it's understanding why that's bad. And that's part of the science behind what we do. So on the web app or website, whatever you want to call it, there is a section called Know the Terms. And there are a series of scientific terms that underpin the work around this. So what is allostatic load and allostatus? What is chronic stress? So there's a language and a lexicon built. There's also more about what's going on, to know the system, what's going on in the planning system that regulate land use, land management and activity. And the last is we did create a guidebook that has a series of informative essays in there that explain about health and experience, that it's more important to recognize that than it is to hide behind data. So I think that's just one thing I really felt was quite important that we bring to this. This is a database project, but we shouldn't hide behind data and continue the journey in data. It is about using data for a right means. I have seen that, I think it is it Richard has got a hand up? Or was...
No, Richard didn't put his hand back down. But
currently muted if he was trying to say something.
No, I don't. No. I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, Julie, but I don't think that was exactly where you were going with it. Is that some communities often are already tracking their data, and because of how we gathered the data, it can be very useful to have some of the on the ground environmental data, because we're using bigger zones, and so it's how that's comparing and contrasting, which we like I said, we definitely would like to know, because yes, absolutely, this is a community starter and want this to be community led, and if we are to do that, then ensuring that we give the opportunity for communities to lead on the data gathering would be really dope. But first, we're going to understand it through the Clean Air Toolkit, how, to build our own understanding and infrastructure with something much smaller, to then understand how we then scale it up.
Thank you. Yeah, I was not referring to adding data for the sake of adding data, but more to correlate or even qualitatively validate the data you already have with the communities. So you show the maps about pollutants, and then they say how they experience that. And maybe it's just a qualitative correlation, but it's just to double check.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that lived experience is so essential, because as we said, if you have asthma, even at low levels, that will be of high effect. So that low level is without context. But that's the same with any data score like that, is that it's missing that experiential context. Cool. Joanna, is it another hand up, or did you not put your hand down?
Yeah, I've got another question, if that's okay. I was just wondering whether you've had any interest, or whether you are interested in engaging with GPs and other medical professionals, because we are doing some work at the moment in Natural Resources Wales to try and influence the curriculum for GPs in Wales to include aspects of the kind of wider determinants of health. So to think about the environment that people are living in, whether they have a connection with nature, like a broader understanding of well-being. And I think that tools like this potentially could be used also by GPs and not just by individuals.
Yeah, I mean, oh God, that's another dream, right? Like, so we've sat through a couple of town halls from communities, as in town halls that are being led by communities when they're talking to things like organizations like the Environmental Agency and Public Health England. And 3 out of the 3 that we've sat in, they have all asked why the GPs are not tracking this. So i.e. the individual saying, I'm living right next to the landfill site, so it's the latest one for Stop the Stink for Willie's Quarry. And I'm going to the GP and I'm saying, I'm getting headaches, nausea, rashes, having trouble breathing. But because there isn't a box to tick yet at the GP level, right? It's not, well, you don't have asthma, you don't have high blood pressure, you're fine in parentheses, but you're not fine because you're still experiencing nausea and headaches and rashes, etc. And they thought, why am I just being sent home rather than the GP logging that experience? I'm right next to a landfill site and I'm experiencing this. So I think it's an educational piece for the GPs to also start thinking like this, which again, that's the main purpose of Right to Know, right? Getting us all in this framework that we're getting sick because our habitats are sick. That there is an absolute link between the two. And I don't know why necessarily, but I don't think GPs are in that mind frame just yet. And the short story is that they're not logging it. They're not even seeing that way. There was a young boy at South Hall, 16 years old, got asked by their GP, "Guess GP, are you smoking or your parents smoking because your lungs, your asthma is getting progressively worse?" And he told them a gasworks site just started next door. Hasn't been logged. There's been no further rapport because then it would be dope as well for the GPs to go, actually, I'm going to back my community in what they're campaigning and saying you're making my community sick. So there's work to do in terms of getting them to reframe how they see health and listening to the people when they're saying there's a new environmental stressor that's come in. Maybe that's why I'm getting sick, or I live right next to a high street. Maybe that's why I have asthma. But yeah, we would love next year to start figuring out how we build that rapport and how do we get GPs to start changing the way that they see health. So if you want to
Amazing. Yeah, absolutely. Well, so we've been talking about how to influence GPs for 4 years, and we've just got this opportunity next month to go and run some training for the kind of directors who then write the educational curriculum for GP. So I think it's certainly something that we'll try and build into that training session because I think it's a really powerful tool which will be really straightforward for those people to kind of interact with and share. So yeah, I'll be in touch.
Cool, thanks. And Guppy, I don't mean to put you on the spot. If you don't want to answer, no worries. But I don't know if you have anything to say from like the work that MedAct has been doing in terms of also campaigning.
Yeah, just in case folks don't know about a few organisations actually that organise specifically with healthcare workers across the health sector. So MedAct is the sort of longer standing, I guess, relatively well-resourced organisation. I'll just drop the name here. They work across economic justice, environment, public health, and immigration issues and human rights. And a lot of the work they're doing at the moment is around the Health for a Green New Deal. So that's largely around COP, and then moving forward. And through that is mobilizing local communities of healthcare workers. So you'll see on their website, they have local groups who are engaged in different campaigns and are kind of collectively organizing and building relationships with community organizers who represent, I guess, either their patients or the communities in their locality that they are supporting to achieve health justice. And then the other organization that I think is worth mentioning is the People's Health Movement, who have been, I guess, a bit nascent recently, but also started working more collectively around, creating a space for people to speak of their experiences of health, but also to create visions and imaginations of what a healthy society would look like, I guess, with a critical analysis of racism and classism. And I think that's probably why those two organizations are more distinct, is that they hold a power analysis in their work. Although there are lots of organizations doing a lot of work around public health, MedAct and People's Health Movement are just that much more explicit about what the root causes of inequality and health inequalities are, and so strategize a little bit more around that in a more collective manner. So they're two really great groups to access some support or strategic advice from, and we'll have those organized communities of health workers as part of their network too.
Cool, thank you for that explanation, Guppy. Do we have any more questions or comments, feedback? Even if it's bad feedback, I don't mind. Okay, cool. Well, thank you everybody who stayed to the very last minute. Do follow us on Twitter on @right2know. Oh, Josh, can you write it? Because I will.
Yeah, it's @right2know UK.
Thanks. We're going to be exposing all the other tools and doing tweets about, for example, what are the communities that are already organizing? There's a whole list at the back, as Josh mentioned. There's also know your terms. For those of us who are experiencing environmental injustice, it's so important that we know the language, the difference between health inequity and health inequality, because that matters in terms of the justice that we're getting. And then we're also just going to keep putting examples of various other tools for community organizing. And again, if any of you want to organize a town hall for your community, it can be for as little as 2 people or 3 people, but just a group of people that want to understand a little bit more about how health relates to the places that we live. Just send us an email and we will happily do a half an hour town hall with you guys, because we think it's super, super important that we start to move the conversation that health is not about individual choices, but about the places that we live. So thank you so much, and hopefully see you soon.